Welcome to Divine Inspiration. In today's video, we delve into the riveting and complex story of Absalom, a tale of ambition, betrayal, and the eternal struggle between power and righteousness, found in the second book of Samuel. This story not only captivates with its drama, but also offers profound insights into the human spirit and the consequences of our choices. Join us as we explore these timeless lessons and uncover how they still resonate in our lives today. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to stay updated with our deep dives into biblical narratives. The story of Absalom is a powerful narrative that prompts us to reflect on the complexities of human nature. It demonstrates how someone endowed with beauty and charisma can be consumed by ambition and a desire for revenge. This tale, chronicled in the second book of Samuel, is more than just a historical account. It is a mirror reflecting the internal struggles that we all face. It begins with a prince beloved by the people and ends with a civil war that divides a nation. Along the way, we see how seemingly small decisions can have devastating consequences. The saga of Absalom teaches us about the pitfalls of pride, the dangers of vengeance, and the high cost of unbridled ambition. Though it occurred thousands of years ago, the lessons we can draw from this story are surprisingly relevant today. Absalom was a man destined for greatness from birth, as the son of the renowned King David. Born into a position of privilege and power, in the second book of Samuel 3:3, we find the first mention of Absalom, highlighting his noble lineage as not only the son of a king, but also the grandson of another. This dual royal heritage undoubtedly influenced the formation of Absalom's character and his future aspirations. Growing up in an environment where power and authority were constants must have shaped his worldview and expectations from a young age. Absalom likely saw himself as someone destined for great deeds, perhaps even surpassing his father's accomplishments. The Bible pays special attention to Absalom's physical appearance, a detail that becomes significant throughout his story. In the second book of Samuel 14:25-26, we find a detailed description of his exceptional beauty. The text tells us that throughout Israel, there was no man so praised for his appearance as Absalom. From head to toe, he was without any defect. This was not ordinary beauty, but something that made people stop and take notice. The emphasis on Absalom's physical appearance is not mere curiosity. It helps us understand how he was perceived by others and how this influenced his interactions in a society where physical appearance was often seen as a sign of divine favor. One particularly notable aspect of Absalom's appearance was his hair. The Bible dedicates an entire verse to describing Absalom's hair, a detail that may seem strange to modern readers but held significant cultural meaning at the time. Still, in chapter 14 of 2 Samuel verse 26 informs us that Absalom cut his hair once a year when it became too heavy. The text even mentions the weight of the hair that was cut, 200 shekels by the royal standard, illustrating that Absalom's hair was not just a curiosity. It symbolized his virility, strength, and status. In many ancient cultures, hair was seen as a source of strength and vitality. But Absalom was not admired solely for his physical appearance. He possessed a natural charisma that attracted people. Although the Bible does not explicitly mention these qualities, we can infer their existence from how Absalom interacted with the people and won their support. He had a remarkable ability to connect with ordinary people, making them feel heard and valued. This gift for interpersonal relationships would later prove crucial in his life when he began to build a base of support for his political ambitions. Absalom's charisma went beyond his physical appearance. It was a combination of charm, eloquence, and an apparent concern for others' well-being. These qualities made him a natural leader, someone people instinctively wanted to follow. The people of Israel had a special love for Absalom. His combination of physical beauty, charisma, and royal status made him an almost mythical figure in their eyes. When Absalom walked through the streets, people likely looked at him with a mix of admiration and hope. To many, he represented the bright future they desired for their country. Absalom seemed to understand the problems and aspirations of ordinary people in a way that few members of the royal family did. He did not behave as someone distant or superior, but as someone who genuinely cared about the people's welfare. This connection with ordinary people would become a powerful weapon in Absalom's hands, one he would skillfully use to advance his interests. The people's love for Absalom was both a blessing and a curse, for it fueled his ambition and sense of entitlement to power. However, Absalom's seemingly perfect life was about to be shaken by a family tragedy that would change the course of his story. In the second book of Samuel, chapter 13, the Bible begins to narrate a dark event involving Absalom's sister Tamar and his half-brother Amnon. Verse 1 of this chapter tells us, "Now Amnon, David's son, fell in love with Tamar, the beautiful sister of his half-brother Absalom." This passion of Amnon was not pure or acceptable love. It was a forbidden desire that would lead to terrible actions. Amnon and Tamar were half-siblings, children of the same father but different mothers. In the culture of the time, as in today's, a relationship between siblings was considered taboo. This situation created a dangerous tension within the royal family, a ticking time bomb about to explode. Amnon's unhealthy passion for Tamar was the spark for a series of events that would have devastating consequences for David's entire family. Consumed by his desire for Tamar, Amnon devised a plan to be alone with her. The Bible details Amnon's scheme in 2 Samuel 13, verses 6 and 7. We read that Amnon pretended to be ill and asked King David to send Tamar to care for him. He said, "I am ill. Please have my sister Tamar come and prepare something for me to eat. Let her prepare the food in my presence so that I may see it and eat from her hand." David, unaware of his son's true intentions, agreed to the request. This plan reveals Amnon's calculating nature and his willingness to manipulate even his own father to satisfy his selfish desires. David's naivety in this situation is surprising, showing how even a wise king can be blinded when it comes to family matters. Amnon was about to commit an act that would not only destroy Tamar's life, but also disrupt the harmony of the entire royal family. What followed was an act of violence that would forever stain David's house. When Tamar came to care for Amnon, thinking she was merely helping a sick brother, she found herself trapped in a dreadful situation. In 2 Samuel 13:11-14, the Bible describes Amnon's assault on Tamar. The text says, "But when she brought the food near for him to eat, he took hold of her and said, 'Come, lie with me, my sister.' But she answered him, 'No, my brother, do not force me, for no such thing should be done in Israel. Do not do this outrageous thing.' Despite Tamar's desperate protests, Amnon raped her. This horrific act was not only a crime against Tamar, it was a betrayal of family trust and a sin in the eyes of God. Tamar's life was shattered in an instant, and the repercussions of this act would extend far beyond that moment. Amnon's rape of Tamar planted a seed of hatred in Absalom's heart, which would soon grow and bear bitter fruit. Absalom's initial reaction upon learning what had happened to his sister was one of calculated silence. In 2 Samuel 13:20, we read Absalom's words to Tamar, "Keep quiet for now, my sister. He is your brother. Do not take this thing to heart." This advice might seem cold at first glance, but it reveals Absalom's strategic mind. He was not ignoring his sister's suffering. He was planning a careful revenge. Absalom took Tamar to live in his house, offering her protection and care, but internally a storm of emotions was brewing. Absalom's silence concealed an intense anger and a desire for revenge that only grew over time. He knew that an impulsive reaction could ruin his plans, so he chose to wait and meticulously plan his retaliation. This period of waiting shows Absalom's self-control and cunning, traits that would be crucial in his future political endeavors. The news of what Amnon had done reached King David's ears. In 2 Samuel 13:21, the Bible tells us, "When King David heard of all these things, he was very angry." However, surprisingly, there is no mention of any punitive action against Amnon or of comfort for Tamar. This apparent lapse of justice on David's part must have further fueled Absalom's anger. The king's inaction in the face of such a grave crime within his own family likely made Absalom question his father's ability to rule justly. This moment marks a turning point in the relationship between Absalom and his father. Whatever respect and admiration Absalom might have had for David began to turn into contempt and resentment. David's lack of action in this critical situation planted the seeds of Absalom's future rebellion. He began to see himself not only as an avenger for his sister, but also as potentially a more just and capable ruler than his father. For 2 long years, Absalom harbored his resentment, meticulously planning his revenge. In 2 Samuel 13:23, we read, 2 years later. This waiting period demonstrates Absalom's patience and self-control. He did not act impulsively, but waited for the perfect moment to execute his plan. During this time, Absalom maintained a facade of normalcy. Verse 22 of the same chapter informs us. Absalom spoke to Amnon neither good nor bad. This silence was not a sign of forgiveness, but a calculated strategy. Absalom was playing a long game, carefully preparing every move. His ability to remain calm and coldly plan his revenge reveals much about his character. Absalom was not just a handsome and charismatic man, he was also a patient and determined strategist. These qualities, though used for a dark purpose in this case, were the same that could have made him a formidable leader. The opportunity Absalom had been waiting for finally arrived with the sheep shearing festival. This annual event was a time of celebration for the shepherds of Israel, a time of abundance and joy. Absalom saw in this festival the perfect chance to carry out his plan for revenge. In 2 Samuel 13:23-27, we read how Absalom invited all the king's sons to the festival, insisting particularly on Amnon's presence. When the day of the feast came, Absalom gave specific instructions to his servants. Verse 28 reveals his words, "Watch when Amnon's heart is merry with wine, and when I say to you, strike Amnon, then kill him. Do not be afraid. Have I not commanded you? Be courageous and valiant." This plan shows Absalom's coldness and determination. He chose a moment of celebration to execute his revenge, turning an occasion of joy into a scene of tragedy. The meticulousness with which Absalom planned Amnon's murder reveals the depth of his anger and his relentless desire for vengeance. Absalom's plan was executed with deadly precision during the festival. When Amnon was drunk and vulnerable, Absalom's servants acted according to their master's instructions. 2 Samuel 13:29 describes the fateful moment. So the servants of Absalom did to Amnon as Absalom had commanded. Amnon's death was a shock to all those present. The same verse continues, "Then all the king's sons arose, each mounted his mule, and fled." This act of violence was not just the culmination of Absalom's personal revenge, it was also a direct blow against King David's authority. By killing Amnon, David's firstborn, Absalom not only avenged his sister, but also dramatically altered the line of succession to the throne. The consequences of this act would be far-reaching, affecting not only the royal family, but the entire kingdom of Israel. Absalom had crossed a line from which there would be no return. He was now a murderer, a rebellious prince who had openly defied the authority of his father and king. This moment marked the beginning of a new phase in Absalom's life, a journey that would transform him from a beloved prince into an enemy of the state. The vengeance he so deeply desired had been fulfilled, but the price would be far greater than he could have imagined. The death of Amnon at the hands of Absalom set off a chain of events that would forever alter the course of Israel's history. Chapter 13 of 2 Samuel ends with a scene of chaos and confusion, with the king's sons fleeing in panic. In verse 30 we read, "While they were still on their way, the report came to David, 'Absalom has struck down all the king's sons. Not one of them is left.'" Although this initial report was exaggerated, the reality was serious enough. Absalom had murdered the apparent heir to the throne, an act that was both a crime and a political statement. From this moment on, Absalom could no longer be seen merely as a rebellious son. He had become a direct threat to David's reign. The love the people had for Absalom would now become a dangerous weapon, a means by which he could challenge his father's authority. A family tragedy had turned into a national crisis, and the seeds of a future civil war had been planted. After Amnon's murder, Absalom found himself forced to flee Israel. In chapter 13 of 2 Samuel, verse 37, we read, "Absalom fled and went to Talmai, son of Ammihud, the king of Geshur." Geshur was the kingdom of Absalom's maternal grandfather, a place where he could find safety away from his father's wrath. This exile lasted 3 long years, a period that deeply shaped the prince's character and ambitions. Away from his father's court, Absalom had time to reflect on his actions and plan his future. It is likely that during this time, he learned much about politics and governance by observing how his grandfather ruled Geshur. This period of exile, though difficult, served as a kind of school for Absalom, preparing him for his future political endeavors. While Absalom was in exile, the situation in Jerusalem was tense. King David was torn between his role as monarch and his love as a father. In chapter 13:39, the Bible tells us, "And King David, after mourning for Amnon, longed to go to Absalom." This feeling reveals the complexity of David's emotions. On one hand, he grieved the loss of Amnon. On the other, he missed Absalom despite the crime he had committed. This tension between paternal love and royal duty would be a constant in David and Absalom's relationship from this point forward. The people of Israel, who so loved Absalom, likely missed him too, wondering when and if the handsome prince would return. Absalom's return to Jerusalem was carefully orchestrated by Joab, the commander of David's army. In chapter 14 of 2 Samuel, we see how Joab used cunning to convince David to allow Absalom's return. In verses 1 to 20, we read that Joab sent a wise woman from Tekoa to tell a story to the king, a parable that echoed Absalom's situation. The woman said to David, "Let the king remember the Lord as God, so that the avenger of blood may not destroy anymore, lest my son be destroyed." This story touched David's heart, causing him to reflect on his own situation with Absalom. Joab's strategy worked, and David finally agreed to bring Absalom back. In chapter 14:23, we read, "So Joab went to Geshur and brought Absalom back to Jerusalem." This moment must have been one of great anticipation for Absalom. After 3 years in exile, he was finally returning home, to his people, to the city he hoped one day to rule. However, Absalom's return was not as warm as he might have expected. Verse 24 informs us, "But the king said, 'He must go to his own house. He must not see my face.' So Absalom went to his own house and did not see the king." This cold reception from David planted the seeds of even greater resentment in Absalom's heart. He was back in Jerusalem but had not yet regained his place in the royal court or his father's heart. Absalom must have felt rejected and humiliated. He who had once been the favorite son was now treated as a stranger in his own home. This treatment would profoundly impact Absalom's future actions, fueling his ambition and his desire to prove his worth. Over the next 2 years, Absalom worked to regain his status and influence in Jerusalem. His beauty and charisma, which had so impressed the people before his exile, once again became his primary weapons. Chapter 14:25 reiterates the extraordinary description of Absalom's appearance. In all Israel, there was no one so highly praised for his handsome appearance as Absalom. From the top of his head to the sole of his foot, there was no blemish in him. This physical beauty, combined with his natural charisma, made Absalom a magnetic figure who attracted attention and admiration wherever he went. Absalom began to strategically position himself, gaining the sympathy of the people and building a support base. He knew that to achieve his goals, he would need popular support. The prince began presenting himself as an alternative to his father's rule, someone who understood the needs and aspirations of the common people. In chapter 15:2, we see how Absalom started his campaign. He would get up early and stand by the side of the road leading to the city gate. Whenever anyone came with a complaint to be placed before the king for a decision, Absalom would call out to him and ask, "What town are you from?" Absalom's tactic was brilliantly simple. He positioned himself in the path of those seeking justice from the king, offering to listen to their problems. Verse 3 continues, "Then Absalom would say, 'Look, your claims are valid and proper, but there is no representative of the king to hear you.'" With these words, Absalom subtly criticized his father's administration, suggesting that the king was not adequately meeting the people's needs. At the same time, he portrayed himself as someone who cared, someone willing to listen and help. Absalom's strategy went beyond merely listening to the people. Verse 5 tells us, "Also, whenever anyone approached him to bow down before him, Absalom would reach out his hand, take hold of him, and kiss him. This gesture of intimacy and respect was unusual for a prince. By treating common people with such consideration, Absalom was breaking the traditional barriers between royalty and the populace. He presented himself not as a distant prince, but as a friend of the people, someone who stood by them in their daily struggles. The impact of Absalom's campaign was profound. Verse 6 summarizes the result of his actions. Absalom behaved in this way toward all the Israelites who came to the king asking for justice, and so he stole the hearts of the people of Israel. Day by day, week by week, Absalom built his base of support. He was not just gaining sympathizers, he was creating a network of people loyal to him who saw him as a leader genuinely concerned with their problems. Meanwhile, Absalom was also making subtle criticisms of David's administration. He did not attack his father directly, but insinuated that the current system was not functioning as it should. By telling people that their claims were valid, but that there was no one to hear them, Absalom was planting the seed of dissatisfaction with David's government. He presented himself as the solution to the very problems he pointed out, thus creating a demand for his leadership. Absalom's promises to the people were of justice and equality. In verse 4, he says, "Oh, if only I were appointed judge in the land, then everyone who has a complaint or case could come to me, and I would see that they receive justice." With these words, Absalom presented himself as a reformer, someone who would bring positive changes to Israel. He promised a more accessible and fair government where everyone would have a voice and be treated equally. These promises were attractive to the people, especially to those who felt neglected or wronged by the current system. Absalom's campaign lasted for 4 years, a significant period during which he solidified his position as a viable alternative to David's government. Verse 7 tells us at the end of 4 years, Absalom said to the king, "Let me go to Hebron to fulfill a vow I made to the Lord." This seemingly innocent request marks the beginning of the final phase of Absalom's plan. During these 4 years, he had built a solid base of support throughout Israel, creating a network of loyal followers ready to support him in his next steps. The success of Absalom's campaign to win the people's hearts is a testament to his political skills and personal charisma. He managed to transform his situation as an exiled and disadvantaged prince into a position of strength with broad popular support. Absalom's story up to this point shows us how ambition, combined with political skills and a deep understanding of human psychology, can be a powerful force. He had prepared the ground for his next moves, creating an atmosphere of expectation and desire for change among the people of Israel. With the groundwork laid and the people's support secured, Absalom was ready to take the next step in his ambitious plan. In 2 Samuel 15:7, we read at the end of 4 years, Absalom said to the king, "Let me go to Hebron to fulfill a vow I made to the Lord." This seemingly innocent request hid darker intentions. Hebron was not a random choice. It was the city where David had first been anointed king. By choosing Hebron, Absalom was making a symbolic statement, linking himself to the legitimacy of his father's reign. The religious pretext of fulfilling a vow was a smokescreen for his true plans. Absalom was about to launch his rebellion against his father, using religion as a cover for his political ambitions. David, unaware of his son's real intentions, agreed to the request. Verse 9 tells us the king said to him, "Go in peace." So Absalom went to Hebron. This permission from David shows how he still trusted Absalom despite past events. Meanwhile, Absalom had set in motion a carefully planned conspiracy. Verse 10 reveals, "Then Absalom sent secret messengers throughout the tribes of Israel to say, 'As soon as you hear the sound of the trumpet, then say, Absalom is king in Hebron.'" This secret message was the signal for his supporters across the country to prepare for the revolt. Absalom was creating a network of allies, ready to act at his command, demonstrating his ability to organize a large-scale conspiracy. One of Absalom's most cunning moves was the recruitment of key figures for his cause. Among them was Ahithophel, one of David's most respected advisors. In verse 12 we read, "While Absalom was offering sacrifices, he sent for Ahithophel the Gilonite, David's counselor, from his town Gilo." Ahithophel's presence by Absalom's side was a significant blow against David. Ahithophel was known for his wisdom, and his adherence to Absalom's cause gave legitimacy to the rebellion. This strategic move showed that Absalom was not only relying on his popularity, but also seeking the support of influential and respected figures. The choice of Ahithophel was particularly shrewd, as he knew David's strengths and weaknesses, giving Absalom an invaluable strategic advantage. Absalom's conspiracy quickly gained momentum. Verse 12 continues, "And so the conspiracy gained strength, and Absalom's followers kept increasing." Absalom's carefully crafted plan was bearing fruit. Years of cultivating popular support, combined with astute political moves, were creating a wave of support in his favor. The speed with which the rebellion spread caught David and his loyal followers by surprise, leaving them in a vulnerable position. The momentum was clearly on Absalom's side, with more and more people joining his cause every day. This rapid expansion of the rebellion demonstrated not only the effectiveness of Absalom's planning, but also the latent discontent with David's reign that he had skillfully exploited. The news of the rebellion finally reached David's ears. In verse 13, the gravity of the situation is revealed. A messenger came to David and said, "The hearts of the men of Israel are with Absalom." This information must have been a shock to David. His own son, whom he had forgiven and allowed to return from exile, was now leading a rebellion against him. The extent of Absalom's support showed that this was not a minor insurrection, but a serious threat to David's reign. The king was now facing not only the betrayal of his son, but also the loss of his people's support. This revelation marked a crucial turning point in the story, forcing David to make quick and difficult decisions to ensure his survival and that of his loyal followers. Faced with this imminent threat, David made a surprising decision. Instead of staying and fighting in Jerusalem, he chose to flee. Verse 14 tells us, "Then David said to all his officials who were with him in Jerusalem, 'Come, we must flee, or none of us will escape from Absalom. We must leave immediately, or he will move quickly to overtake us and bring ruin upon us and put the city to the sword.'" David's decision shows his concern not only for his safety, but also for the well-being of Jerusalem and its people. David, the great warrior who had faced Goliath and conquered Jerusalem, now found himself forced to abandon his city. This strategic retreat revealed both the seriousness of the situation and David's wisdom in avoiding a direct confrontation that could result in great bloodshed in the holy city. David's flight from Jerusalem was a moment of great humiliation for the king. Verses 16 to 18 describe the moving scene. The king set out with all the people following him, leaving 10 concubines to take care of the palace. The king set out with all the people following him, and they halted at the edge of the city. The image of David, the great warrior king, fleeing from his city must have been shocking to many. This hasty flight marked the beginning of a period of uncertainty and conflict for all of Israel. Seeing the Lord's anointed leaving Jerusalem certainly shook the faith of many Israelites. The scene of David crossing the Kidron Valley with his loyal followers is one of the most dramatic in the Bible, symbolizing the temporary fall of the great king and the apparent triumph of his rebellious son. While David was fleeing, Absalom was entering Jerusalem triumphantly. Chapter 16:15 tells us, "Meanwhile, Absalom and all the men of Israel came to Jerusalem, and Ahithophel was with him." Absalom's entry into the city marked the height of his conspiracy. He now occupied his father's throne, seemingly realizing his ambitions. However, the real battle for control of Israel was just beginning. The presence of Ahithophel at Absalom's side reinforced the legitimacy of his claim to the throne. The young prince now found himself at the center of power, but holding on to that power would be a much greater challenge than seizing it. Absalom would have to prove he was capable of ruling a divided kingdom and dealing with the constant threat posed by his exiled father. With Absalom in Jerusalem and David in flight, the stage was set for civil war. Both sides began to devise strategies to secure control of the kingdom. David, despite being on the run, was not defenseless. He was an experienced military commander, and many loyal soldiers had followed him. Chapter 17:1 shows Ahithophel advising Absalom. Ahithophel said to Absalom, "I would choose 12,000 men and set out tonight in pursuit of David." This counsel showed Absalom's urgency to eliminate his father's threat. The ensuing war would not just be a conflict between father and son, but a battle for the future of Israel. Each side had strengths. Absalom had popular support and Ahithophel's counsel, while David had his vast military experience and the loyalty of veteran warriors. A crucial element in this war of strategies was Hushai's double role. David had sent Hushai back to Jerusalem as his spy, instructing him to feign loyalty to Absalom. In chapter 17:5, we see Hushai in action. But Absalom said, "Summon also Hushai the Archite, so we can hear what he has to say." Hushai's presence at Absalom's court allowed David to stay one step ahead of his son, receiving vital information about enemy plans. This shrewd move by David showed that even in exile, he was still capable of sophisticated political maneuvers. Hushai would have to walk a tightrope, giving advice that seemed to favor Absalom but actually benefited David. His ability to play this double role would be crucial to the unfolding of events. Battles for control of the tribes of Israel spread throughout the country. Each side tried to win the support of the various tribes, knowing that whoever had the most popular support would control the kingdom. Chapter 18:6 describes one of the decisive battles. The army marched into the field to meet Israel, and the battle was fought in the forest of Ephraim. These battles were not just military conflicts, but also struggles for the loyalty and support of the people of Israel. The civil war tested tribal and family bonds, forcing many Israelites to choose between their loyalty to David and Absalom's charismatic appeal. The varied terrain of Israel, from dense forests to arid deserts, presented unique challenges for both sides, requiring constant adaptation of their military tactics. The civil war had devastating consequences for the kingdom. Families were divided, communities were destroyed, and the unity that David had worked so hard to build was unraveling. Chapter 18:7 gives us an idea of the scale of the conflict. There, the army of Israel was defeated by David's men, and the slaughter that day was great, 20,000 men. These numbers show the high human cost of Absalom's ambition and the struggle for power. The war not only cost lives but also precious resources, weakening Israel at a time when the nation needed to be strong against external threats. The internal conflict opened deep wounds in Israelite society that would take years to heal even after the war ended. The division of the kingdom had profound social consequences. Communities that once lived in peace were now on opposite sides of the conflict. The social fabric of Israel was being torn apart by civil war. Chapter 19:9 gives us a glimpse of this division. Throughout the tribes of Israel, the people were arguing, saying, "The king delivered us from the hands of our enemies. He is the one who freed us from the Philistines. But now he has fled the country because of Absalom." This passage shows how the people were confused and divided, uncertain about whom they should support. Loyalty to David competed with the allure of the new and charismatic Absalom. This division was not limited to political lines but penetrated deeply into families and communities, creating tensions that would persist long after the end of the armed conflict. As the war dragged on, it became clear that the conflict could not be resolved without significant losses on both sides. Absalom's ambition and David's determination to maintain his throne were driving Israel to the brink of collapse. The nation that had once been united under David's reign was now fragmented and weakened. The outcome of this civil war would determine not only the future of David's dynasty, but also the fate of the entire people of Israel. The consequences of Absalom's rebellion would extend far beyond the battlefield, shaping Israelite politics and society for generations. The story of this civil war would serve as a lasting reminder of the dangers of unchecked ambition and the importance of national unity. The civil war between David and Absalom reached its climax in the forest of Ephraim. In 2 Samuel chapter 18 verse 6, we read, "David's army marched into the field to confront Israel, and the battle took place in the forest of Ephraim." This battle would be decisive, determining the future of Israel and the fate of Absalom. The terrain of the forest, which should have favored Absalom's forces, turned out to be a deadly trap. Verse 8 reveals, "The battle spread throughout the countryside, and that day the forest devoured more men than the sword." The wild nature of the forest of Ephraim became a relentless enemy, confusing and scattering Absalom's troops. This chaotic scene set the stage for the tragic fate that awaited the rebellious prince, demonstrating how even the best-laid plans can be undone by unforeseen circumstances. Absalom's end came in an unexpected and ironic way. Verse 9 describes the scene. Absalom, riding his mule, came upon David's soldiers. As the mule went under the branches of a large tree, Absalom's head got caught in the tree. He was left hanging between heaven and earth while the mule went on. The beauty that had so distinguished him and helped him rise to power now became the instrument of his downfall. Suspended between heaven and earth, Absalom found himself in a position as precarious as his usurped reign. This moment serves as a powerful metaphor for the fleeting nature of power, based solely on appearance and charisma. Absalom's vanity, symbolized by his luxuriant hair, literally became his downfall, reminding us of the dangers of excessive pride. Absalom's death came at the hands of Joab, the commander of David's army. Despite David's explicit orders to spare his son's life, Joab decided to take matters into his own hands. Verses 14 and 15 report, "Then Joab took 3 javelins and thrust them into Absalom's heart while he was still alive in the tree, and 10 of Joab's armor-bearers surrounded Absalom, struck him, and killed him." Absalom's death was swift and decisive, putting an end to his rebellion once and for all. Joab's action, though disobedient to David's orders, ended the civil war and secured the throne for his rightful king. This act by Joab illustrates the frequent conflict between personal mercy and political necessity, a dilemma many leaders face in times of crisis. The news of Absalom's death reached David, provoking a deep anguish in him. Verse 33 captures David's lament. "The king was deeply moved, and he went up to the room above the gate and wept. As he walked, he cried, 'Oh, my son Absalom! My son Absalom! If only I had died instead of you, O Absalom! My son, my son.'" This lament reveals the broken heart of a father, transcending issues of state and rebellion. David, the victorious king, was devastated by the loss of his son. His grief was so intense that it threatened to overshadow the victory that had secured his throne. This moment shows David's humanity, reminding us that even great leaders are not immune to personal pain and suffering. David's excessive reaction to Absalom's death had political consequences. His deep sadness left his soldiers, who had risked their lives for him, feeling undervalued. Chapter 19:3 describes that day. "The victory turned into mourning for all the troops, because they heard it said that the king was grieving for his son." Joab had to intervene, warning David that his attitude could alienate his loyal followers. This episode highlights the conflict between David's personal feelings and his responsibilities as king, a dilemma he faced several times during his reign. Joab's intervention serves as a reminder of the importance of balancing personal emotions with a leader's public duties. With Absalom's death, the rebellion came to an end, but its consequences continued to reverberate throughout Israel. The kingdom was deeply divided, and the task of reunification would be arduous. Chapter 19 recounts David's return to Jerusalem and his efforts to reconcile the tribes. Verse 9 shows the people's confusion. Throughout the tribes of Israel, the people were arguing, saying, "The king delivered us from the hands of our enemies. He is the one who freed us from the Philistines, but now he has fled the country because of Absalom." This passage reveals the schisms left by the civil war and the challenge David would face in reuniting the nation. The healing and reunification process would be long and require all of David's diplomatic skills and leadership. The impact of Absalom's rebellion on the succession and the later reign of David was significant. Absalom's death removed a potential claimant to the throne, but also cast a shadow over the final years of David's reign. The king's trust in his advisors and even in his own children was shaken. This was reflected in his later decisions, including his choice of Solomon as his successor. Absalom's rebellion had exposed the fragilities of the Israelite monarchy and the importance of a clear and stable succession. David spent his last years strengthening Solomon's position and preparing him to assume the throne, aware of the threats that could arise from within the royal family itself. In the years following the rebellion, David faced other challenges, including a revolt led by Sheba, son of Bichri, as narrated in 2 Samuel 20. This new rebellion, although smaller, showed that tensions within the kingdom still persisted. David also had to deal with the consequences of a census he ordered, resulting in a plague that struck Israel. These events demonstrate that even after the victory over Absalom, David's reign continued to be marked by difficulties and trials. Nevertheless, through these experiences, David continued to trust in God and seek his guidance, as evidenced by many of the Psalms attributed to him during this period. David's final years were dedicated to consolidating his kingdom and preparing for the transition to his successor. The first book of Kings, chapter 1, narrates how David, already old and weak, had to intervene to ensure that Solomon, and not Adonijah, another of his sons, would succeed to the throne. This situation shows how the issue of succession, which had been at the heart of Absalom's rebellion, continued to be a concern until the end of David's life. The king devoted himself to preparing Solomon to govern, giving him advice and instructions as recorded in 1 Kings chapter 2. David emphasized the importance of following God's ways and maintaining the unity of the kingdom. Lessons he had learned through his own experiences, including the painful rebellion of Absalom. The historical and moral lessons from Absalom's story are many and profound. His narrative serves as a warning against the dangers of unbridled ambition and political manipulation. Absalom's rise and fall demonstrate how charisma and beauty can be used as tools of power, but also how they can lead to ruin when not tempered by wisdom and humility. The story also highlights the complexity of family relationships, especially when intertwined with political power. For David, the rebellion was both a political crisis and a personal tragedy, testing his ability as a leader and his faith in God. Through this trial, David demonstrated resilience and a capacity for forgiveness that would become part of his legacy. The story of Absalom also teaches us about the long-term consequences of our actions. David's initial decision not to punish Amnon for the rape of Tamar triggered a series of events that almost cost him his kingdom. This reminds us that even seemingly small choices or omissions can have enormous repercussions in the future. The narrative underscores the importance of justice, integrity, and moral courage in leadership. For the people of Israel, the rebellion was a period of turmoil and division, exposing latent tensions between the tribes and the fragility of national unity. The initial support for Absalom and the subsequent return to David show how volatile public opinion can be, especially in times of crisis. Absalom's legacy in biblical history is complex. On one hand, he is remembered as a rebellious son and a usurper. On the other, his story is an integral part of the narrative of David and the development of the kingdom of Israel. Absalom's beauty and charisma, his political skill, and his tragic fall make him a fascinating figure who continues to capture the imagination of readers and scholars of the Bible to this day. His story serves as a powerful reminder of the dangers of pride and uncontrolled ambition, as well as the importance of forgiveness and reconciliation in family relationships and political leadership. Reflecting on Absalom's story invites us to examine our own lives and motivations. How often do we let ambition or the desire for recognition lead us to actions that harm others or ourselves? How do we balance our personal aspirations with our responsibilities to family and society? The narrative challenges us to consider the long-term consequences of our choices and the importance of acting with integrity, even when facing temptations or injustices. Moreover, David's response to the rebellion and his subsequent leadership teach us about the importance of resilience, forgiveness, and the ability to learn from our mistakes. In conclusion, the story of Absalom is an epic drama of ambition, betrayal, love, and loss that remains relevant today. It offers us valuable lessons on leadership, family, and the complexities of human nature. As we reflect on this narrative, we are challenged to examine our own lives and choices. May we learn from Absalom's mistakes and David's resilience, seeking wisdom and integrity in our own journeys. If you found this exploration of Absalom's story interesting and insightful, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more in-depth biblical content like this. Share this video with friends and family who may benefit from these reflections. Together, we can continue to discover the rich lessons that biblical stories have to offer us. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you won't miss our upcoming videos about fascinating biblical characters. See you next time. Thank you for watching our exploration of Absalom's story. We hope this journey through one of the Bible's most dramatic tales has given you valuable insights into the complexities of ambition, leadership, and the importance of making wise choices. If you found this video enlightening, please consider subscribing to Divine Inspiration. Give us a thumbs up and share this video with friends and family to help spread these timeless lessons. Don't forget to leave your thoughts and reflections in the comments below. We love hearing from you. Stay inspired and see you in the next video.